I mentioned bomba music in Puerto Rico, same thing. You have bomba sica, you have bomba holandés, bomba yuba. I mean, there's 6 or 7 different styles depending where in the island, right? Um, for example, one of the most common ones would be bomba sica, Xica, okay? And it's in today's adaptation, you play it like this. And here's one thing, real quick to note: bomba is one of the only patterns in Afro-Cuban and Afro-Caribbean music that's a 1 bar pattern, meaning everything else applies to clave, which is a 2 bar pattern, right? Ah, 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 ah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. But the clave for bomba is just 1 bar. Da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3. So it's not, I'm going to say impossible, but it's very hard to get crossed up how you would in, like, let's say something with clave in a bomba, because it's very straightforward. It's 1 bar repeating. Okay, so this is your bomba sica as it's played now. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, and it's a bit more up tempo. Okay, it's a bit more up tempo. Before, you would just have one guy got another guy and another drum filling that in. And then you have the guy, and these are on those barriles that we saw, the big drums, right? Then you got a guy soloing to the dances, okay? In today's bomba adaptation, if I'm playing bomba now on 2 drums, I have 2 jobs: to play the pattern and fill in as if I was soloing. So I'm trying to do 2 jobs at once. I'm trying to keep the pattern going, but still do a few things on my smaller drum. This is the tumbadora, right? This is the conga, trying to do things to kind of fill in as if I was soloing. So that will sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if it's a fast, that gets pretty difficult, you know, but that's the job now, right? Whereas before, all I could have to worry about was, and then the other guy could just be. So that's when we're talking about adapting to modern music, that's what we're talking about, right? We still don't lose that solo part. If I go back to Wawanko, there's not as much room to fill in like there would be on conga, but there is some shuffling going on in between the main hits, and I'll demonstrate it real quick. So again, the Wawanko, if we're going back, right? And I'll do it the Mantanza style, which is just a 1 hit. Someone's doing that, you're doing 3 jobs. You're doing that, you're doing this guy, and you're trying to fill in what you can as the soloist without losing track of, which is the essence, right? This is all just extra, especially if there's no dancer, that's just extra. What we see a lot today is if there's a bongo player, they're taking the place of the soloist. And the bongo player in a lot of rumba and wawanko, they're the ones kind of soloing and filling in, and the conga player just worries about the pattern, right? You're doing that, and now the bongo player is back, doing whatever the quinto player would do, all right? bomba tradition, you would try to have somebody have that smaller drum, so you could have one person just playing the pattern and one person soloing. Um, Bongos aren't very typical to bomba playing, so that doesn't translate as far as the bongo player will solo in a bomba. If it's arranged that way, it's different, but folklorically, that doesn't really happen much. Um, Another thing we see a lot in a lot of these adaptations is very similar patterns. One, for example, from Puerto Rico to Colombia, there's another typical pattern of Puerto Rico called plena music, and it's a typical folkloric rhythm. Today is kind of more associated with the holidays around Christmas time, but it's not necessarily just Christmas music. It's a rhythm that is played all throughout, the whole year. But they have a pattern um, that the conga has adapted. So that's a traditional style of music played with almost tambourines without the bells that ring. So it would just be a hand drum. It would just a circle, skin on it. It's like a tambourine, but without the mini cymbals, let's call them, right? And you would have three, and you would have the large one just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, just hitting the down beat. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you have a middle drum doing beats 3 and 4. So together it will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Smaller one, again, solo. Because again, this is party music. There's dancing. There's all this festivities going on, right? So the way it gets adapted today is similar to bomba. You're doing and all that stuff in between, okay? What we see, again, going back to just the rhythm itself, at the root, the bomba is this. Which is very similar to from Colombia, cumbia. It's almost just an inversion, right? In Colombian music, the smaller drum, which if we're going back to the instruments we saw, would be the llamador, like a muff and then like an open, like a ghost note and an open. Or in plena, I'm doing that over here. In the Colombian, it's here. Or plena. Right? So we see there are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of patterns that you could tell the roots are very close knit, because you're going from the Caribbean to South America, and you're having patterns that are almost identical, just an inversion of each other. Another version of that is there's a bomba pattern that's similar to a variation of samba. So there's a bomba pattern called yuba, which is 1, 2, 3. It's in like a 6/8 feel, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's a style of samba that's it's like, man, those patterns are almost identical again. You're going from the Caribbean out to even further in South America. So historically, what we see is a lot of these patterns are rooted in under the same tree, right? And we know it's Western Africa, it is Central Africa, and the rhythms that they brought with them, no matter where the slaves ended up, they preserved it, they passed it on, it survived. The slave owners trying to eliminate all that, it still persevered, and today we're able to celebrate it and play it and use it and enjoy it. So again, it used to be percussion ensembles. Just to review before I get into some technique now, unless there's a question that pops up. Used to be percussion ensembles, right, in the folkloric sense. Multiple drummers, each carrying their own voice, their own pattern, that all together would make a rumba or a bomba or a plena or a samba, right, or a cumbia. In today's modern adaptation, you're taking the main accents, the main hits, putting them together, mashing them so one person can play it. Okay, um, there are patterns that also apply to, let's say, a drummer or a timbal player or a bongo player in all of these, right? So they also have their way to play bomba. They also have their way to play a rumba, right? What we see is, like, for example, if you're a timbalero and you have a clave, you're doing what I was doing earlier, the right in a rumba. Now the timbalero does that on his clave or on the side of the shell, right? So again, they're taking that piece, that voice in the ensemble, and applying it to their drum. I mentioned how the bongo player would be the soloist or the quinto player in some of the more traditional Cuban and rumba rhythms. Okay, there's a question from Trevor. When playing more modern style of music, how do you decide which patterns to play? Good question. This is what I do. For example, outside of, let's say, the Afro-Cuban world, at times I get to play with jazz bands, right? The conga isn't really native to jazz music. So when playing stuff like that, or even pop music, there's always something that the bass or maybe the drummer is doing that resembles a folkloric pattern or resembles a style of music, right? Maybe not exactly, but there's always something that's like, oh man, I could follow that as this. I could play that as a variation of a rumba or a variation of X, Y, and Z or tumbao. So one, I always look first, does this resemble anything I know? Number two, let's say it does resemble something I know. If I play that pattern, and let's say you have a drummer, is it gonna get in his way? Because if you're a conga player playing with a drummer, you need to take a back seat, right? He's driving the band, right? You are very much accompanying right now. Whereas maybe a more traditional setting, the conga is the one pushing and kind of driving the train along. If you got a drummer, you got to step back. He's in charge. You play around him, okay? So outside of seeing, does this resemble something? If it does, what can I play? Does it get in the drummer's way? Does it groove well? Because once you take this instrument outside of the folkloric, you can play anything. I don't have to play a bomba as a traditional bomba, right? No one's gonna be there, hey, that's not how you play a bomba. I'm like, well, this ain't bomba music. I'm just playing along to a groove, right? So, and that's something I struggled with at first. I wanted to respect the tradition so bad. I had this fear, I'll share with you. I always had a fear that the old Cuban guy with a guayabera and a cigar would be in the back room shaking his head like, that's not how you play that, But it got to the point where it was like, well, this ain't a drum circle. This ain't a rumba, I'm playing pop music. I'm playing to Bruno Mars or something, who cares? Not who cares what I'm playing, but I'm not following a tradition right now. I'm adapting this instrument to fill in something new, okay? So we can't be scared to take chances, when we're taking this instrument away from a traditional, maybe Afro-Cuban or Afro or Central or South American setting, right? When we're using it in a pop or a jazz or a gospel or a blues, we got to play around with it sometimes, and come up with some grooves on our own. Sometimes I try to think as a drummer, but for example, if a drummer is playing a traditional backbeat, doonts, bats, doonts, bats, doonts, bat, I might not want to do. He's already doing that, so I do something away from that. If he's doing doonts, bat, doont, bat, doont, bat, doont, bat, doonts, bats, doonts, bats. don't want to do exactly what he's doing. He's already doing that. All right. Hope that answers your question. I'd like to hear talk a bit about what percussionists expect need from a piano montuno while soloing. Okay, how busy should it be? Specific accents to hit. Okay, the bell pattern. Perhaps you could talk more about this. I tend to do the opposite of the piano. I say if he's really busy, that's already a lot of notes. So I may take just take a simpler solo. If he's doing something that allows more space, that allows more room for me to fill, right? So it depends the song a lot of times as to what fits and what works or whatever the note progression is in that moment. But there's no wrong answer, really, unless you have a conguero specifically say, hey, when I do my solo, do something a little bit with more space, or hey, just push it because I'm gonna do something over here, maybe a little bit more laxed or more syncopated. So there isn't a wrong answer, but I always take a measure or two to hear what they're gonna play, right? The same, there's bell pattern, there's guys on bell, or like bongo players who would just keep, and then there's guys that come in, like that changes the mood, like, okay, I gotta adjust what I'm thinking, what I'm gonna lay down, and what I'm gonna develop. Regarding the piano montuno being like a bell pattern, that's like, it's just something we've always, in a lot of bands, with more experienced piano players, and I didn't know this till recently, like they look to the timbalero's bell to kind of not really keep them in time because they keep their own time, but it's almost like a reference point, right? To see if there's ever a question about clave. If they're clashing too much with that timbal bell, and they're like, my montuno might be out of clave because I should be hitting most of the notes or the patterns of the melody with that bell. So that's just something, and I never really even thought of that. I heard it at a rehearsal once, where there was an issue with the clave that changed in a song, and the piano was like, well, what bell pattern are you playing there? And I'm like, well, why is he asking that? And he was like, well, because my montuno typically matches up with a timbal bell, right? So in traditional, Cuban or Puerto Rican music, the timbal bell, 1, 2, ba ba taka 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 taka, right? Don't you have very similar accents. It doesn't have to be exact. I'm not saying your piano montuno needs to be a bell pattern, but it should be locking in with some of his stuff. Just how my conga playing has to lock in with, the timbalero, and I have to set up with the bass and matching with the bass. You have interlocking accents throughout, right? How do you decide where it's appropriate to fill as a conguero? It depends the music. For example, Latin jazz is a lot more open. So in Latin jazz, if there's a drummer, it helps to know his tendencies, right? So let me backtrack. This is what I think. If it's obvious a fill goes there, I let the drummer do it. If it's a spot where it's not so common to put a fill, that's where I would take the chance to do it with a drummer. Because you don't want to fill and have him do a fill at the same time, right? So if it's like, this is an obvious, something's coming up, he's going to do a fill, let him take it. Otherwise, I tend to do shorter, more syncopated, maybe not on a downbeat or on a syncopated time, not on an accented beat to do a fill. If it's in, let's say, salsa music, those parts, the orchestrated parts where the brass come in to lay down stuff for a little while, that's typically free reign. You could put a fill in anywhere, right? As long as you're not, again, going off clave or clashing too much with what the horn line is doing or what they're trying to establish. If it's another setting, like let's say pop music, I tend to not fill as much there. Same with like some gospel music, because that's drum heavy. You already have a lot of stuff going on with the bass. You probably have the guitar wailing away. You have vocals. I don't need to do it. I don't need to do it. If I do it, it's because I'm trying to fit it in. It's not organic, right? It doesn't just like flow. If something in the moment flows, meaning if the drummer does something that I could dialogue off of, I'm going to do it, you know, but it doesn't have to be a 2-3 bar fill. It's just one little, that's it, you know, something really small. And trust me, they'll be like, hey, that was cool, you know? And it's a simple dialogue. A fill doesn't have to be something loud, something fast, something, you know, that draws attention. Sometimes it's very subtle, and the guys grooving to you are going to turn like, yeah, that was it, you know? But again, in some of those settings, I tend to just more so establish the groove or try to enhance the groove, right? The drummer, bass, they have the groove. I'll enhance it with a pattern. And if I don't have to do a fill the whole night, then I don't do a fill. But if it feels like it goes, then I do it. You know what I mean? So it has to be organic. I don't want to do it just so they could be, hey, guys, I'm still here. That was my fill. You know, that sometimes just gets in the way, especially when there's already a lot musically going on. You mentioned playing montunos. I know there are variations. What kind of montuno would you recommend to start practicing to improve Latin chops? Okay. To start getting back into the Latin, Julio, I can see you on my screen. Do you have 2 congas or 3? Can you just put up 3? Perfect. Here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna start it off with a tumbao, but it's gonna have you going right and to your left, right and to your left. And trust me, going this motion will help build up. Even if you eliminate this drum, this hand gets stronger, because in Latin playing with montunos, your left weak hand is really what's driving the train. It's not the slap. That's what gets accented, right? The 2 and the 4 hand. But what everyone's following is the weak one, right? That's my weak hand too. But this little shuffle, the baqueteo, as they call it, the left hand, that's what everyone's really locking into. That's the train. So to develop that, I mean, and I could send you on the side maybe some exercises, but if we're talking just tumbao variations, there's going to have you going this way, this way, this way. It works out your left hand a little bit more, having to transition from this to opens, right? And just again, even if you get rid of that 3rd drum, after doing that for a while, you're going to feel this getting enhanced. This, you know, and there's exercises just for that, because that's something that's forever a project for me, right? Just, you know, your non-dominant hand is always a little behind, even for me after, you know, 12, 13 years. So it's something to always be mindful and working on.
Te voy a ver